So now let's go ahead and talk about taking your text and making it more readable and take up less space with columns. Sometimes we want to put things in columns to organize data and information into different sections. Like maybe you have something in the first column and then the second and the third, and they're all separate, but they all have to do with each other. Or maybe you want to fill up space or change the way that things are readable. So really, it's actually proven that when stuff or information is put into columns, people are more likely to read it than when it's in big, long paragraphs. So we do this in like newsletters, reports, all those kinds of things. There's lots of instances where you would want to put things into columns. Or maybe you have like a really long list of items, right? And that keeps going and going down the page, but you really could just pop it into columns and make it go across the page in columns all nice and neat rather than making it continue to go down and have multiple pages of information. So columns are super useful, but most of the time people want to put columns in the middle of documents. So what we're going to try is creating a little section of text and seeing if we can turn it into columns in the middle of our page. So we're in our paragraphs and columns document from our previous lessons, and I want this in here because I want to show what it's like in the middle of document. So I'm going to go ahead and go after this first paragraph here of Latin text, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And this time around, we're going to create another 3 paragraphs of text, but we're also going to go ahead and do English text so we can tell which text we're trying to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and type an equal sign, RAND, open parentheses 3,5, close parentheses. And that will allow me to create English text rather than Latin text. And you want to have it written exactly like that. And then once you've got that, you're going to go ahead and hit enter. And when you hit enter, it will generate those 3 paragraphs for you automatically in their 3 sentences. So we've got, or 5 sentences. So we're going to go ahead and adjust this area. Now, what we want is we want these 3 paragraphs to be in columns and everything else to stay the way they are. But what I want to ask you to think about is, how many columns is your document currently in? Because it is in a certain number of columns. So your document by default is set to 1 column. If you think about it, columns go up and down and then rows go left to right. And the way I try and remember that, or to have students remember that, is if you think about like the Colosseum in Rome or Roman, and Greek buildings back in the day, all of them were held up by these really tall beams called columns. So columns go up and down and they organize everything inside of an up and down fashion, whereas rows go across, especially when we get to like tables and spreadsheets and those kinds of things, that stuff matters. So what we want to do is we want to take our text, which is currently sitting in 1 column. If you think about it, the whole page is considered 1 column. And we want to take those 3 paragraphs and split them into 3 columns. And in the end, what we want to do is we want each paragraph to be in its own column on the page. And then everything else around it, like this top paragraph up here, is going to stay in 1 column, and everything for the borders and shading is going to stay in 1 column, while these 3 paragraphs go into 3 columns. So first steps first, let's find columns. So I'm just going to be clicked in the area of where I want to apply columns to, and I want you to pause the video here and see if you can go find columns. So columns are actually on the layout tab, and the reason they're on the layout tab is so that you can then go ahead and take the text and the content that you have and push it into a certain layout or change the way that it's laid out on the page. So on layout tab, we're going to go here, and in the page setup dialog or setup section group, we're going to go ahead and go to columns. Now, when we go to columns, our goal is to get that section into 3 columns, and we don't have anything selected. We're just clicked in the document. We're going to go ahead and go to columns and select 3. This causes an issue because if you look at your document right now, the whole thing got set to 3 columns. And I would suggest that you have your ruler on. And if you don't have your ruler on, you should pause the video here and go to the view tab and turn it on, because it shows you those 3 columns. It shows where the text is allowed in the white areas, and then the breaks or the spacing between the columns and the margins in the gray. And this is important because it lets you know that you're in columns. And I think that that's a great feature of Word and the ruler, because you're going to need it when you're working with documents that have columns and don't in the middle of the document. But when we clicked 3 columns, it applied to the entire document, and we just wanted it to apply to a certain portion of the document. So we're going to have to make some changes before we can apply it to that certain portion. And I want you to stick with me and do this with me because it really helps you to understand what columns is doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo the columns setting. So I can either hit Control Z on my keyboard, which I highly suggest you start using that keyboard shortcut. So you hold the Control key down and press Z, Or up in the quick access toolbar up here at the top, you actually have an undo button by default where you can undo that and get back to where you were. So in the next video, we're going to start talking about how do we actually break this document into sections so we can change one portion of it into columns.